The deafening silence of an empty cabin never seemed more cruel than on the third consecutive day without food. Hope Vance clutched her aching stomach as she stared out the small window of her isolated homestead at the edge of the Montana Territory. The year was 1878, and her brother's promise to return with supplies had withered like the last of her garden in the unforgiving summer heat. "Daniel, where are you?" she whispered, her voice cracking from thirst. The sun hung mercilessly in the cloudless sky, casting harsh shadows across the wooden floor. At 22, Hope had trusted her older brother when he insisted on traveling alone to Helena for provisions, leaving her to tend their struggling homestead. "Just a week," he'd promised with his characteristic grin. That was nearly 3 weeks ago. The small pantry had been nearly bare when he left, and now it stood completely empty. Hope had stretched what little they had: some beans, a bit of cornmeal, and the last of their salt pork, but even her careful rationing couldn't make it last forever. The drought had killed most of their crops, and game had grown scarce in the surrounding woods. She pushed herself up from the rough-hewn chair, ignoring the dizziness that followed. Her simple cotton dress hung loose on her frame. She'd always been slender, but now her collarbones protruded sharply beneath her skin. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and in her weakened state, the journey would be impossible on foot. Their only horse had gone with Daniel. Hope collapsed onto her narrow bed, tears streaming silently down her face. She had come west with such dreams, following Daniel after their parents died of influenza back in Ohio. The promise of land, of a fresh start, had seemed worth the hardship. Now, as hunger gnawed relentlessly at her insides, she wondered if she would die alone in this beautiful, brutal wilderness. Morning light streamed through the window, waking Hope from a fitful sleep. She had dreamed of their mother's kitchen, of fresh bread and apple pie. The cruel reality of her empty stomach made her curl into herself. She had to try something. The creek might yield some fish if she could find the strength to try. She had just managed to swing her legs over the side of the bed when she heard the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats approaching. Hope's heart leapt with hope, then immediately sank. It couldn't be Daniel. The rhythm was wrong. The sound of multiple horses when her brother had taken only one. Fear replaced hunger as her dominant sensation. Raiders? Outlaws? Indians? The Montana Territory could be lawless, and a woman alone made an easy target. She reached for the rifle kept beside the door, but found herself too weak to lift it properly. The hoofbeats slowed, then stopped. A man's voice called out, "Hello, the house. Anyone home?" Hope froze. The voice was deep, unfamiliar, but didn't sound threatening. Still, she remained silent, her pulse racing. "I see smoke from your chimney," the voice continued. "I'm not looking for trouble. Name's Zach Keller. I'm passing through with supplies. Thought you might want to trade." Trade. The word hung in the air like a lifeline. Hope had nothing to trade except the few family heirlooms she'd brought from Ohio. Gathering what little strength remained, she called back, her voice thin but determined. "I'm alone and armed." "State your business clearly." A pause, then, "Madam, I'm a cattle driver. Was passing by and noticed your place seems isolated. In these parts, neighbors help neighbors. I've got extra provisions I'd be willing to share." Hope hesitated, then made her way to the door on trembling legs. She cracked it open, the rifle propped beside her, though she doubted she could use it effectively. The sight that greeted her made her blink in disbelief. A tall man sat atop a sturdy chestnut horse, the afternoon sun at his back. Behind him, 2 pack horses were loaded with supplies. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features, but she could make out a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. His clothes were trail-worn but clean denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest. A gun belt hung at his hip, but his hands were relaxed on the saddle horn, nowhere near the weapon. "Miss," he said, concern evident in his voice as he took in her condition. "Are you all right?" Hope wanted to lie, to maintain some dignity, but her body betrayed her. Her knees buckled, and she gripped the doorframe to keep from falling. In an instant, the stranger Zachary was off his horse and at her side, strong hands steadying her. Up close, she could see his eyes were a startling blue against his sun-bronzed skin. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked directly. No pity in his voice, just practical concern. 3 days, Hope admitted, too weak for pride. "My brother went to Helena for supplies. He should have been back 2 weeks ago. Something flickered across Zachary's face, recognition, perhaps, or concern, but he didn't comment on her brother's absence. Instead, he helped her to a chair and returned to his horses. Within minutes, he had brought in saddlebags filled with provisions: jerky, beans, coffee, flour, even some dried apples and a precious tin of condensed milk. Eat slowly, he cautioned as he prepared a simple meal of rehydrated jerky broth. Too much at once will make you sick. Hope nodded, watching him move efficiently around her small kitchen as if he belonged there. His hands were large, but surprisingly deft as he worked. "Why are you helping me?" she asked after consuming enough broth to feel her senses sharpening. "You don't know me." Zachary paused in his work, considering her question. "I've been in bad spots before. Had people help me when they didn't have to. Out here, that's how folks survive." He placed a small portion of softened jerky before her. "Besides, no one should go hungry when there's food to be shared." As Hope carefully ate the jerky, Zachary continued unpacking supplies. There was enough food to last week's flour, sugar, coffee, beans, salt pork, and more. He arranged everything carefully on her shelves without being asked. "I can't pay for all this," Hope said, anxiety rising as she calculated the value of what he'd brought. "I don't have much money, and our harvest was poor this year." Zachary turned to her, his expression serious. "I'm not selling these to you, Mississippi. Vance." "Hope Vance," she supplied. "Miss Vance. I'm giving these supplies to you because you need them. I'll never leave you hungry, not when I can do something about it." His words, spoken with such simple certainty, brought tears to Hope's eyes. It had been so long since anyone had shown her such kindness without expecting something in return. "Thank you," she whispered. "But I can't let you do this without compensation." A slight smile curved his lips. "If you insist, you can feed me dinner. I've been eating my own cooking for too long." Hope smiled back, feeling strength and determination return with the food in her stomach. "It's a deal, Mr. Keller." "Zach," he corrected. "Just Zach." As evening approached, Hope felt well enough to help prepare a proper meal with some of the supplies Zach had brought. She learned he was 27, had been driving cattle from Texas to Montana for 5 years, and was currently between jobs. His quiet competence in her kitchen spoke of a man accustomed to fending for himself. "Where are you headed?" she asked as they sat down to a simple but satisfying meal of beans, salt pork, and fresh biscuits. "Nowhere particular at the moment," Zach replied, his blue eyes meeting hers across the table. "I was planning to look for work at one of the ranches north of here." Hope nodded, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest when he looked at her. Despite her situation, she was acutely aware of how improper it was to have an unmarried man in her home after dark. But necessity overruled propriety, and she wasn't about to send away the man who had saved her from starvation. "You mentioned your brother," Zach said carefully. "Daniel, is it? Any idea what might have delayed him?" Hope sighed, setting down her fork. "Daniel's always been restless. He's 3 years older than me, but sometimes I feel like I'm the responsible one. After our parents died, he convinced me to come west with him, said we'd build something grand." She gestured around the modest cabin. "It's not grand, but it was becoming home. Then the drought hit, and Daniel, well, he's not the most reliable when things get difficult." "You think he might not come back?" Zach asked, his tone gentle but direct. Hope had been avoiding this thought, but hearing it spoken aloud forced her to confront the possibility. "He took most of our money," she admitted, "and he's always talked about striking it rich in the gold fields. Part of me wonders if he headed to Deadwood instead of Helena." Zach didn't offer empty reassurances or judgments, and Hope appreciated his honesty. "How long have you been out here?" he asked instead. "Almost a year. We arrived last fall, built the cabin before winter. The land is good when there's rain." Pride crept into her voice despite everything. "I've learned a lot. How to plant, how to preserve food. I can shoot, though not as well as I'd like." "You're tougher than you look, Hope Vance," Zach said with genuine admiration. As night fell, Zach insisted on sleeping in the barn rather than imposing further. Hope wanted to protest the barn was little more than a lean-to but recognized the propriety of his decision. Before he left for the night, he stoked her fire and made sure she had everything she needed within reach. "I'll check on the garden in the morning," he said. "Might be something we can salvage." "We?" Hope questioned, not missing his choice of words. Zach paused at the door, his tall frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. "If it's all right with you, I'd like to stay a few days. Help you get things in order. Then, if you want, I can ride to Helena, see if there's any word of your brother." Hope should have declined, should have maintained her independence, but the thought of being alone again filled her with dread. "I'd be grateful," she said simply. "Good night, Miss Hope." He replied with a slight tip of his hat before disappearing into the darkness. For the first time in weeks, Hope slept deeply, her hunger satisfied and her fears temporarily at bay. She dreamed not of food this time, but of blue eyes and gentle hands. The next morning, Zach was already working when Hope emerged from the cabin. He had found the garden tools and was turning the soil in the parched garden, his shirt discarded in the early morning heat, revealing a muscular back browned by the sun and marked with several old scars. "There's still time to plant some quick-growing vegetables before the first frost," he called when he noticed her watching. "The soil's not bad, just needs water. I found a pump by the creek that needs fixing. I can have it working by midday." Over the next week, Zach transformed the failing homestead. He repaired the pump, bringing water to the revived garden. He mended the roof where it leaked, reinforced the barn, and chopped enough firewood to last well into winter. Each night, he retreated to the barn, respecting the boundaries of propriety despite the growing connection between them. Hope regained her strength quickly with proper nourishment. She worked alongside Zach, their conversations flowing easily as they labored. She learned he had fought briefly in the final year of the Civil War as a very young man, had driven cattle across half the country, and could identify every constellation in the night sky. He never spoke of family, and Hope didn't press, sensing old wounds there. On the 8th day, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Zach finally broached the subject they'd been avoiding. "I should ride to Helena tomorrow," he said. "Make inquiries about Daniel. And," he added hesitantly, "I need to send word to the rancher who's expecting me north of here." Hope felt her heart sink. She'd known this moment would come, but had pushed it from her mind. "Of course," she managed. "You've done more than enough already. I can't keep you from your work." Zach turned to face her, his expression earnest in the fading light. "Hope, I'm not leaving you. I'm just going to town and back. 2 days, 3 at most." "You don't owe me anything, Zach," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You've already saved my life." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "It's not about owing. He paused, seemingly struggling with words. "I care what happens to you. More than I should, perhaps, after such a short time." Hope's breath caught in her throat. She should withdraw her hand, maintain distance, but she couldn't bring herself to break the connection. "I care too," she admitted softly. They sat in silence as darkness fell, hands linked, each contemplating the unexpected turn their lives had taken. True to his word, Zach left at dawn the next morning, promising to return within 3 days. Hope watched him ride away, fighting the irrational fear that he, like Daniel, would never return. The homestead felt eerily quiet without Zach's presence. Hope kept busy, tending the garden, cleaning the cabin, and planning what to say when he returned. If he returned. 2 days passed slowly. On the morning of the 3rd day, Hope was hanging laundry when she heard hoofbeats. Her heart leapt, but the rhythm was wrong again. Too many horses, approaching too quickly. She reached for the rifle Zach had taught her to use properly, holding it steady as 3 riders came into view. Her relief at seeing Zach in the lead quickly turned to confusion when she noticed the tight expression on his face and the 2 strangers flanking him. One was obviously a lawman, wearing a marshal's badge. The other was a well-dressed gentleman whose pinched expression suggested perpetual disapproval. "Hope," Zach called as they dismounted. "This is Marshal Everett and Mr. Jameson from the bank in Helena." Hope lowered the rifle but kept it close as she approached. "Gentlemen," she greeted them cautiously. "What brings you to our homestead?" "Mr. Jameson stepped forward, his eyes coldly assessing the property. "Miss Vance, I regret to inform you that your brother Daniel has been involved in some unfortunate business." The marshal interjected, his tone more sympathetic. "Madam, your brother attempted to rob the Helena Bank 2 weeks ago. He was caught and is currently in custody." Hope felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Rob a bank? That's impossible. Daniel was going for supplies." "He confessed, madam," the marshal said gently. said he was desperate for money, that the homestead was failing. Mr. Jameson pulled papers from his coat. Furthermore, it appears he mortgaged this property to our bank 3 months ago. The payments are significantly in arrears. That's not possible, Hope whispered, though a terrible certainty was forming in her mind. I never signed any mortgage. Your signature is here, Jameson said, displaying a document. The signature was indeed similar to Hope's, but she recognized immediately that Daniel had forged it. That's not my signature, she stated firmly. My brother forged it. The banker's expression hardened. A convenient claim, Miss Vance. Regardless, without payment, we'll be forced to foreclose. Zach, who had been silently watching the exchange, stepped forward. How much is owed? Jameson named a sum that made Hope's heart sink. $200, an impossible amount for her to produce. And if the debt is paid? Zach pressed. The property would remain Miss Vance's, assuming she can prove the forgery. The banker replied dismissively. But that's academic, as I doubt a woman alone can. I'll pay it, Zach interrupted. Now, if you'll accept bank drafts. I have an account in Helena. Hope stared at him in shock. Zach, no? That's your savings. He turned to her, blue eyes intense. Hope, let me do this. Please. The transaction was completed there on her porch table, Zach writing a bank draft that represented years of hard work and careful saving. The marshal confirmed that Daniel would remain in jail for at least 6 months, and possibly years, depending on the judge's ruling. After the men departed, Hope collapsed onto the porch steps, emotions overwhelming her. Why would he do this? She whispered, referring to her brother. Leave me to starve while he tried to rob a bank. Zach sat beside her, close but not touching. Some men aren't made for the steady work of building something lasting, he said carefully. They're always looking for the quick path, the lucky strike. And some men, Hope said, looking directly at him, give everything they have to help a stranger. You're not a stranger, Hope, Zach replied softly. Not anymore. I can't accept your money, she insisted. It's too much. I'll find a way to repay you. Zach shook his head. There's no debt between us. But there is something I need to tell you. His expression grew serious. The rancher I mentioned, the one expecting me, that was a half-truth. I own a small spread north of here. Nothing fancy, but it's paid for. I have a cabin, some cattle, good water. Hope stared at him, processing this revelation. You're a rancher? Why didn't you say so? When I found you, you were vulnerable. I didn't want you to think I had expectations or designs on your land. I wanted to help, plain and simple. He paused, gathering courage. But now, I need to be honest about something else. These past days with you, they've meant something to me, more than I can properly express. Hope felt warmth spread through her chest despite everything that had happened. They've meant something to me too, she admitted. I'm not asking anything of you right now, Zach continued. You've had too many shocks today, but I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, there's a place for you at my ranch. Not as someone who owes me, but as someone I've come to care for deeply. Hope looked around at the homestead she and Daniel had built. Despite his betrayal, there were good memories here. But the thought of staying alone, of fighting the elements and the isolation by herself, held little appeal compared to the possibility Zach was offering. I need time, she said finally. To think, to sort through everything. Zach nodded, understanding in his eyes. I'll stay as long as you need me. And when you make your decision, whatever it is, I'll respect it. The following weeks brought dramatic changes to Hope's life. Daniel was sentenced to 3 years in the territorial prison. Hope visited him once, a painful encounter where he alternated between self-pity and attempts to justify his actions. She left with the realization that while she would always love her brother, she could no longer build her life around his unreliability. Zach remained true to his word, staying to help with the harvest, never pressing Hope for a decision. Their days fell into a comfortable rhythm, working side by side, sharing meals, and talking long into the evening. Gradually, the careful distance between them diminished. One crisp October evening, as they sat by the fire shelling the last of the season's peas, Hope made her decision. I want to see your ranch, she said simply. Zach looked up, surprise and hope mingling in his expression. It's nothing grand, he cautioned. Just a simple spread, about 3 days' ride from here. Is there room for 2? Hope asked, her heart pounding. Zach set aside the peas and moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. Hope, Vance, are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying I don't want to be alone anymore, she replied. And more than that, I want to be with you. Not because I owe you or need your protection, but because these weeks have shown me what kind of man you are. Honorable, kind, hardworking. She squeezed his hands. I think I'm falling in love with you, Zach Keller. Joy transformed his face. I know I'm in love with you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Have been since I found you standing in that doorway, weak but still fighting. What happens now? Hope asked, suddenly shy despite her boldness. Now, if you'll allow it, I'd like to court you properly, Zach replied. And when you're ready, I'd like to make you my wife. Hope smiled, feeling truly hopeful for the first time in years. I'd like that very much. 2 weeks later, after selling what they could of Hope's homestead and packing the rest, they set out for Zach's ranch. The journey was challenging but filled with anticipation as Zach described the land that would become their home. When they finally crested the ridge overlooking his property, Hope gasped. Nestled in a verdant valley was a sturdy log cabin, larger than her former home, with smoke curling from the chimney. A small herd of cattle grazed in fenced pastures, and a creek wound through the property, glinting in the autumn sunlight. Who's tending things while you've been gone? Hope asked, puzzled by the signs of occupation. Zach grinned. My foreman, Hank. Old buffalo hunter turned cowhand. He's crusty but loyal. Been with me since I bought the place 3 years ago. As they rode down into the valley, an older man emerged from the barn, waving in welcome. Hope felt a momentary nervousness. Would Zach's employee accept her presence? Her concerns were quickly dispelled when Hank greeted them warmly, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile when Zach introduced Hope as his intended. About time you found yourself a good woman, Hank declared, tipping his hat to Hope. Place needs a woman's touch, and this fella needs someone to keep him in line. Hope laughed, immediately liking the straightforward old cowhand. I'll do my best on both counts. The next months were a time of adjustment and growing love. Hope learned the rhythms of ranch life, which differed from farming in many ways. She made the cabin truly habitable, adding touches of comfort and beauty that transformed it from a bachelor's quarters to a home. Zach courted her with gentle persistence, respecting her wishes to wait until they were properly married. He brought her wildflowers, taught her to ride better than she ever had, and shared stories of his past, gradually revealing the hardships that had shaped him into the man she loved. They were married that December in the small church in the nearest town, with Hank standing as witness and a handful of neighboring ranchers and their wives in attendance. The simple ceremony reflected their relationship honest, unadorned, and built on mutual respect and deep affection. That night, as snow fell gently outside their cabin, Hope and Zach discovered each other fully for the first time, their passion tempered by tenderness and the knowledge that they had the rest of their lives to learn every detail of each other's hearts and bodies. Spring brought new calves to the herd and news that Daniel had been released early for good behavior. Hope sent him a letter telling him of her marriage and new life, including enough money for a fresh start somewhere. His reply was brief, but seemed sincere in its apology and well wishes. Do you want him to visit? Zach asked when she shared the letter. Hope considered the question carefully. Someday, perhaps, but not yet. We're building something here, and I'm not ready to risk that. Zach nodded, understanding as always. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. As summer approached, Hope discovered she was expecting their first child. When she shared the news with Zach, his joy was boundless. He lifted her gently, spinning her around in the yard until they were both laughing breathlessly. I never thought I'd have this, he confessed that night as they lay together, his hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. A wife, a child, a true home. After the war, after losing my parents, I thought I'd always be alone. You'll never be alone again, Hope promised, cupping his cheek. And neither will I. 5 years later, their ranch had prospered beyond expectations. The small herd had tripled in size, and their cabin had been expanded to accommodate their growing family 4-year-old Samuel and 2-year-old Elizabeth, with another child on the way. On the anniversary of the day they'd met, Zach surprised Hope with a special dinner after the children were asleep. He'd convinced Hank's wife to watch the little ones while he prepared Hope's favorite meal. What's the occasion? Hope asked, though she knew perfectly well. Zach smiled. the lines at the corners of his eyes crinkling with happiness. At 32, he was in his prime, as handsome to her now as the day he'd appeared at her door with life-saving supplies. 5 years ago today, I found a stubborn, half-starved woman who captured my heart even when she could barely stand, he said, raising his glass and toast. Best detour I ever took. Hope laughed, her hand resting on her swollen belly. And to think, if Daniel hadn't abandoned me, we might never have met. I like to think we would have found each other somehow, Zach said, reaching across the table to take her hand. Some things are meant to be. Hope squeezed his fingers, feeling the calluses earned through years of honest work. I remember what you said that first day. I'll never leave you hungry. And I never will, Zach promised, his eyes reflecting the same love and commitment they had shown from the beginning. Not for food, not for love, not for anything that matters. As they sat together in the home they'd built, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, Hope reflected on the strange turns of fate that had brought them together. Her brother's betrayal, which had seemed like the end of everything, had actually been the beginning of something far more precious than she could have imagined. Outside, the Montana sky stretched endlessly above their ranch, stars shining down on the life they had created together, a life built on a promise kept, day after day, year after year. I'll never leave you hungry.